Welcome to Issues and Challenges in Sterile Processing, a podcast conversation presented by Sterile Processing University. Our episode today is SPD, Loaners and Sales Reps, Friends, Foe, or Partners. I'm Jason Morosi, Senior Educator.
And I'm Nancy Chauvin, President of Sterile Processing University.
Well, Nancy, we're at it again.
Yeah, we didn't have to deal with loaners when I first started in SPD because we didn't do this type of surgery we're doing today. So loaners are more of an issue with people who've worked in sterile processing for, say, the past 15 years or so. But it has become a major, major issue.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I've had loaners my whole career. It's always been an issue. As you just said that, I am a little curious, especially in the 80s, when you had total knees, total hips, what is it? You just had everything there?
It was one set.
Yeah.
For each type of surgery. They didn't have all the sophisticated implants and everything that they have today. We did a lot of pinning back then. It all started, I'm going to go back a little bit further than that. Probably in the early 70s, I graduated from nursing school and I worked in a hospital for a while. And then an orthopedic surgeon asked me if I would help out in his office. So I went to work for him. And I worked with him actually late 60s to when I got married in 71 and moved to New Jersey. But anyway, he went up to Mass General to learn the Charnley procedure, which was an innovative procedure for total hips. And that is what really started to turn the tide. Again, that was in the late 60s, early 70s. But, there was the instruments, they were used for that particular procedure, and that was that. But then as the population aged and the need for more total joint replacements came in, we only had the hips initially. Then it moved to the knees. Now you could replace any joint that needs to be replaced pretty much. But that started it. And as the sophistication changed, the instrumentation changed, the implants changed, because you need instruments to work with the types of implants you're putting in. And that's when it got out of hand. You can't expect the hospital to have every single kind of implant and instruments for those implants, because most of your surgeons, all of them that I'm aware of, like to use the instruments and implants that they practice on in medical school.
Correct.
So if they're used to Zimmer, then they want to use Zimmer when they go into practice. So that makes it even more challenging. You might have 3, 4, or even 5 different loaner companies represented. And that's what's made it into this quote unquote monster that we have now.
I worked for a hospital system. It was really interesting. We had 2 hospitals 3 miles apart. So we had one that just did neuro, podiatry, and ortho. And then we had one that did the rest of everything else. Because I was the new guy, I had to go back and forth, like when you're doing it a new person. So I did a lot at the orthopedic one. I remember sometimes having 2 setups of 2 different instruments. Some of our doctors would be like, they wouldn't know until they got in there if they wanted the Zimmer or that or the Pew. Well, because back then they were separated, because I think Zimmer and the Pew are together now, but they were separated back then. And I would have like 50 trays. Like I'd have 3 back tables, 50 trays. It was insane. And yes, we did use the Charnley retractor. Now that you said that, I remember that very well. And it stayed like that. I mean, maybe we got down to having one company, but you literally had like 20 trays of that one company's instruments.
Well, at one of my hospitals, we had this one orthopedic surgeon who was pretty well on in age. Every single total hip that he scheduled required 52 trays of instruments. So this is as of 10 years ago. Never used more than 6. And nobody ever said anything to him. Never, ever used more than 6, but yet 52 had to be there. And, again, the surgeons are making money for the hospital. They have the right to decide what they want and what they don't want in that operating room, because they're the ones that have to use it.
Uh-huh.
But again, this complicates the whole problem for sterile processing. We don't have a choice. If they bring in 53 trays, then we have to clean and sterilize 53 trays.
Added benefits from back in 1998 that is no longer in practice. Basically, back then, RNs in the operating room scrubbed. They all were taught how to scrub. They were used as scrub techs a lot, and because of that, I had some good RNs that were like, when we're opening, they were like, "No, you don't need that. We'll wait. We'll wait. We'll wait." So we did. They as it progressed, the RNs would start taking control of it. That knew what you would need and not know what you need, and they wouldn't let you open up all 50 trays. They would say, you only need these 6 to start. If you need it, I'll open it, because it's not something you count, like a loaner
Yeah.
tray. And that was a saving grace. But if you didn't have that and you had an RN who was not used to scrubbing, they wanted to open up the whole thing because they didn't want to hear the doctor yell and complain.
Well, the situation today, and I think it's a good one, is that the companies do have reps who are very knowledgeable, and they will come in for every single case. They'll make sure that everything is there. They'll make sure that I've seen them with the laser pointers where they're not allowed in the sterile field, but they'll point to something and tell the surgeon that's what you need, and give them whatever advice they need if they have a problem. So it's really advanced in that degree, but just like everything else, if you have 5 different systems that you're using, different companies, and when you think of all of the instrumentation that's involved, this is what has created a problem, because now the OR staff has to know 5 different types of instrumentation, SPD has to know them, and it's really a major issue. Now, we didn't have control over a lot of that loaner stuff, and we included it in ST 79. But then we decided, no, we have to have something that's a little bit more than that. So Amy does have a document on loaned instruments. And I'll never forget when we were developing the document, we had decided, all the SPD people, that we wanted a weight limit on these sets. I actually gave a deposition for a nurse who was removing a tray of instruments from the flash sterilizer because they came in late. That's a whole nother issue. We'll talk about that. And she went to remove them. The set weighed 40 pounds, but nobody knew it. And she tore all the ligaments in her shoulder. Doing that, the instruments wound up on the floor, and she was disabled for quite a while. But the point was, I said to them, didn't you weigh the sets? Didn't you have a policy that your sets cannot weigh more than 25 pounds with the container? That is the standard that the loaner companies agreed to with us. Because when we were developing the document, their argument was, well, no, because certain hospitals, the doctors want all of these in the tray and it might weigh up to 40 pounds. I said, that doesn't make it right. We can't buy 40 pounds of instruments. Then you complain when it goes to the operating room, the set's still wet inside. So they did agree to the 25 pounds, but I still don't see people weighing them. I do know that many people do have a scale and will weigh them, but you need a very firm policy on loaned instruments. And I think we need to start with that, because that is the root of all evil. You have to have in your policy when the instruments need to arrive. If you don't have that in there, you're dead in the water. You need to say, I need it within 24 hours of the start of the procedure. If you're a very big hospital and you could have multiple joints going on, you might want them to come in 20, 48, or 72 hours. And then you hold them to it. Because what happens is, the case is going at 7:30 tomorrow morning. 3:30 in the afternoon, we get 35 trays in for 2 different cases. In the meantime, we had 70 cases in the operating room. How are you supposed to get this all done? And people are under pressure. So what do they do when they're under pressure? They take shortcuts. Or they're rushing. And then we have mistakes. We have bioburden. We have wet sets. Or the sets aren't up there on time. So you've got to have that in there. You've got to have the weight constraint in there. You've got to tell them, don't bring me your garbage. I've had dead bugs inside of instrument trays. I've had bioburden. I've had tape that was caked on. I've had some of these containers now are plastic. The
Mhm.
bottom of the tray was completely cracked and broken. So you wonder why that the wrapper's getting torn.
Yep. You know,
So
you brought up a really good. You just said something that was really, really, really important because again, I've had so many trays in the last 10 years of my life where I had loaner trays where I'm called into the room where there is a foreign object, but everybody likes to say bioburden,
yeah,
and that causes such havoc between the operating room and sterile processing that there is a difference between bioburden and a foreign object.
right. Bioburden would be blood with microorganisms and what have you, whereas a foreign object would be hair. It would be paper, be a nail that fell off, an artificial nail. Uh,
Mhm.
I've even seen with the pens that he used to mark trays, the steri markers were inadvertently left inside of the tray. But either way, it doesn't belong in there and impacts on the patient. So if you have to have a very strong loaner policy, it has to be approved by infection prevention and risk management, and then you have to enforce it. What happens when the rep just blows you off? One day at one of my hospitals, I get a call from the operating room. They go, "Where's my instruments?" And I said, "Well, the rep just brought him in at 6 o'clock this morning." "No, no, no." He said he brought him in last night. Why don't they already? I said, "No, I was here. He brought them in at 6:30 this morning." Now, fortunately, one of the best things that came to hospitals was the reps had to check in. They have a
Yep.
computerized
WebEx.
check-in. We were able to get the record to show that he was lying. Now,
Yep.
I'm sure he did it because he didn't want to get the surgeon upset, but he threw us under the bus.
Hmm.
And
Oh,
I
they.
told him, I said, "We will expedite these for you, but we're not going to rush the process and you not have the instruments the way they should be." So
Hmm.
that's why your loan policy is so important. The other thing you have to have in there is a check-in and a check-out. You want to make sure when those instruments come in that you have a count sheet for every single tray. I don't care how many times it comes in, because sometimes they'll add something that surgeon wants that wasn't on there previously.
Hmm.
Now you say, "Well, I want to check these in with the rep." Well, sometimes they come in they come in by FedEx. Sometimes they come in by courier. The rep isn't always there. So we put in our policy, if the rep is not available, you will accept our count. And
Hmm.
that count is important. You need to know the correct number of trays arrived and that each tray was complete. Because if it's not complete, it could be that one item that's going to hold up the case.
Yep.
So you
Yeah.
have to notify the operating room.
Yeah. I mean,
Con-
I've even. Go ahead.
Conversely, at the end of the case, when the instruments are clean, you do another count to make sure that everything's there. Because what happens is several weeks later, the rep comes in and hands you an invoice and says, "Oh, you owe me $800 for a screwdriver. Never came back to me after the case." You have
Hmm.
no proof now. You're
Yeah.
paying for instruments that you never lost or damaged instruments. So the
Hmm.
check-in and the check-out is very important also. I know some people now are taking pictures. There's some loaned instrument programs that are out there, but you've got to have a policy and you've got to really handle these efficiently or you could have major issues.
Yeah. I mean, I could. A lot of people don't even realize. I mean, I've had it where I've had the instrument, but it dropped on the floor, and we had to couldn't proceed with the case without it.
Yeah.
Like that's how important those instruments are in there. That you can miss one instrument, and oddly enough, most of them say no IUSS. Then there's no
Well,
recommendation.
I'm glad you brought that point, Jason, because one of the last things that I had to handle before I retired was that exact scenario.
Hmm.
And it blew up. I mean, it went all the way up to the CEO of our entire system. And so I sat down with the rep for that particular case and I said, "Look, my recommendation to our policy is if you have a one of a kind instrument that is so critical that if something happens, if it drops, if it breaks, or what have you, the case cannot continue, then you are to provide us with a additional instrument that we can package and wrap separately for the case.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you get around that.
Yep.
I mean, there's some things they can make do, but there are some things that they cannot. And as you've mentioned, a lot of these items do not have immediate use instructions, and they're not required to. The FDA does not require a manufacturer to provide IUSS. They only have to provide wrap sterilization. So if they have IUSS, yes, fine. But if not, you can't just put it in there. And that's what people think. Well, it's emergency. We should be able to. How do you know you're doing it correctly? Who's washing it? Are you washing it in the operating room? If you are, do you have the equipment that's recommended in the cleaning instructions? I don't think so.
I tell you, I've been in that situation several times, and it is not fun sitting there with a surgeon, with a patient on the table, an operating room director, and going, well, there's no IUSS. I can't do it, and ooh, that is not fun.
No.
I want to backtrack real quickly, though, because I think this is very important, as the current SPD world is very new. After, COVID, as we've talked about in other episodes, we have a fluctuation of a lot of people left and we have a lot of new people. And I think the new question is, for the new people, why do facilities lie on loaners? They don't understand why we're getting so many, the new SPD techs. Why are these loaners coming in? Why do I have to do 50 trays? Why do I have? And I think that's a good point to point out to the newer people in the business, why we have them.
Well, first of all, you could never afford to purchase and inventory all these different instruments.
Yeah.
We just mentioned the least that I've seen for a case is 8 trays, but that's rare. You usually have much more than that because, again, they don't know what they're going to find. They're not going to know what they're going to need. So if you have even 3 companies, I know a lot of facilities try to standardize with one. Good luck if you can. But again, the surgeon has the right to request instruments and implants that he's used to doing surgery with. So if you have 3 different companies and you have 10 different orthopedic surgeons, you'd need a room just for those instruments. And we can't afford to do that. Plus, the technology is changing on a daily basis, just about. So what happens if you buy the instruments, then they get outdated? Who's going to buy the outdated ones? You might be able to give away to charity to a third world country. So that's how the whole loaner or loaned instruments, they call them, came into play. It's cheaper to rent them for the case than to buy them and not have what we need. Same thing with your implants. In most cases, your implants are on consignment. We don't own them. We store them here. We're still responsible for them. If somebody walks off with them, or if they open them and put it back on the shelf, we have to pay for it. But the implants change as well.
Yep.
So it's a necessary evil. And, loaned instruments are not just for orthopedics. Sometimes you have to, say, for example, you have a bunch of arthroscopes and they all need repair. And you can't be without 5 arthroscopes or whatever. So the company will loan you one. Well, how often can't you find the loaned ones to return and you wind up paying for them? What we did was we took I think it was a fuchsia color instrument marking tape, because we didn't use that on any set. That's another issue we'll talk about. But anyway, we would put that on, and we had a loaned instrument book, and we would put down the date, what the item was, the serial number, the manufacturer, and the date we received it, the date that the original one went out for repair. When ours came back, we would then get the loaned one that matched up with it, and we could identify it because of the tape. You might see, well, what if you have 5 or 6? We go by the tape and the serial number. So we then would take the tape off, clean it, and send it back. That resolved that issue. So loaned instruments are not just for the joints and what have you. It could be for anything, even patient care equipment. I remember at one hospital, we had 3 Wagenstein suctions that were lost for 2 years. Nobody did anything about it. We could have bought 3 operating rooms for what we paid for those, because they were lost and we couldn't find them.
Yeah, GYN lots of like loaner scopes,
Yes.
um, loaner cameras for
Yep.
for your general surgery, ENT equipment, I mean, urology, massive loaners on
Yeah.
that. Especially when things break, because you
Yeah.
get your loaners, then you start getting loaners from your salespeople, and then or you get it from your instrument repair company too. So you got
Right.
loaners coming from two different areas. I think it's very important to break down the process. So if you're going to get a loaner and you've never had it in your facility, there is a process. Oh, and quickly too, like you were talking about doctors wanting to use systems. Currently, materials management has really been stepping in, and if it's not on the approved vendor list, doctors now are starting to get told no. And
Well,
you
you're
know,
right. You're right. It depends on the system.
yeah. I mean, and it is. It's a system thing. I have seen. I have just recently, in the last 5 years, seen them being told no. Before that, never. So that's a new thing. But these doctors are also now not becoming. They're not. Their doctors have sold their practice to the hospital, and they're hospital employees.
Yes. Well, they're also learning more finances now because, their livelihood depends on their ability to do the surgery.
Mhm.
So they have to, in many facilities, I know what we had like 7 different orthopedic vendors in our system because we had 10 hospitals. But we were able to reduce it down to 3.
Mhm.
Now, there could be exceptions. You have to allow for exceptions. There may be something unusual that doesn't fall under the same purview, an exclusion clause. But for the most case, we were able to do it with 3 different vendors, and it did work. It took a lot of work, but they understood the financial implications for both the system and for them, and we were able to do it. But not everybody can do that.
If I'm correct, and I really should know this answer, when a hospital brings in a loaner, and the fee for the loaner, is that in the patient's charge, or is that just in the surgery charge?
It would be in the surgery charge, I
Charge.
would think, because
Yeah,
it's
right.
part of the supplies they're using.
That's
Yeah.
what. Yeah, I can't remember because it's been a long
They,
time since I had to do that.
they bundle the operating room charges in most cases.
Yeah.
They'll include the nurses' fees, the scrubs fee, the gases that are used,
Hmm.
because every minute in the operating room can cost over $3,000 a minute
Hmm.
when they bundle all of those charges, liquids that are used and what have you. So then if there's anything special, like if you have the actual implant, the implant is, and I know that for a fact because I got a few of them. They're billed separately. They're on your they're on your bill separately.
um, yeah. So as I was going to say before, the process when your operating room manager says you're going to get a loaner in. This is the first time the doctor's using it. As a sterile processing tech supervisor manager, don't sit there and wait for it. You start asking, where are the manufacturer's instructions? I need to know how to before this comes in because I've never seen it before. I got to make sure I can sterilize it.
Well, that's why it's got to be in your policy that when
Yep.
the instruments come in, you need a count sheet and the current IFU. The problem is sometimes the IFUs that the reps have are outdated. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't blame them. I always verify and go on the company webpage, or I'll make the call and call the company and say, can you send me the IFU? Or if you have one of the online systems, you can go in there.
Uh-huh.
But you need to have the IFU to find out exactly how to process it.
Yeah, and the online systems are great, and I've used them and stuff, but I like to get both because I have pulled online sources and then called the company at the same time and got a asked for a current one, and
Yeah.
I would get two different IFUs that were saying two different things.
Yeah, I always go straight to the company,
Yeah.
and you speak to customer service because people aren't aware, and we're going to be doing one on IFUs. If not, we should schedule one. There is a code on the bottom of each IFU to tell you the revision date or the
Hmm.
date that it was developed. So when I'm questioning an IFU, I'll call customer service and I say, I have your IFU for ABCD instrument, and it says revision date January 2022. Is this your most current IFU? And she'll say, oh no, we updated it in 2025. Can you please email it to me? Then what I do is I take the existing IFU and I always tell them to send it in PDF. Why? Because I want to save it. Because if there was a lawsuit, here I go again, the IFU that was in effect at the time of the incident is what you'd be judged by. So in 2022, if it told me that I could flash it, I was fine. But in 2025, if it said no immediate use,
Yeah.
okay, so that's why you need the old ones. So I would take the old ones and save them in a folder on my computer, old IFUs, and I would put it by company so they were easy to find. So when they come in, you want the current IFU and you want the count sheet. That's really important. And then you have to confirm, the weight. Make sure that the weight is correct. And then you go through and do your inspection.
If it's a scope, it's a scope. If you're getting a tray dropped off and there's 30 pieces in there and nobody knows what they are, in department in service, and you need it on for everybody on every shift, because you don't know what shift after the surgery is done it's going to land on. A lot of times people just worry about getting the day shift, but if it doesn't come out to 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's going to end up on 3 to 11. And guess what? Somebody on 3 to 11 is going to go, I don't know what this is. I don't know what this is. And nobody touches it. And then it falls on your overnight shift.
But Jason, you know how difficult it is to get your reps to come in and do an in-service SPD. All I hear is, I can't do it now. I have to do this surgery with so-and-so. Then I have to go to this hospital and do surgery. I can't remember the last time I was able to get a rep in and do an in-service. Maybe they're overworked, I don't know, but I keep telling them, if you don't want mistakes to be made, then you got to make yourself available. And I'll videotape it. Yep. Then I'll show it on all 3 shifts, and then we'll have it for people to reference. But Correct. You've got to work with me. Don't complain that we're making mistakes, and yet you're not there to help us. This is not our area of expertise. We can follow the instructions for cleaning and sterilization, but when it comes to what they are and how they're used and how they're taken apart and put back together, no, that's not our real horse.
Luckily enough, I never had that kind of pushback. I also was smart enough, in a sense, to challenge them and be like, well, you're going to be here for the case, right? Oh yeah, of course. I got to in-service the OR. Well, then my staff would like to go, and or before you in-service the OR, come a half an hour earlier and in-service my department. I got a lot of compliance with that because, unfortunately, just like you said, SPD is not necessarily their priority, but they will be there to in-service the operating room. That's for sure.
I have a couple of stories. You know me, the storyteller. Yeah. One day I was at one of my hospitals and I had to leave and go to another hospital in my system. And as I'm getting in my car, I see obviously what was a rep, because he had his scrub suit still on and he had his little trolley and he had a whole bunch of trays. So I got in my car and I drove to my other hospital. And again, my guardian angel is always there. As I'm getting out of my car, who's pulling into the same hospital parking lot? The same rep. So I go into the operating room. I was going to be meeting with them, and I'm standing there and I see the rep come in and go right into the doctor's lounge. So I went to the OR director. I said, let's time him and see if he's going to change, because he was just at another hospital. He still has his shoe covers on that he used in the parking lot and everything else. Let's see how far it's going to take. He was out like in 30 seconds, and she looked at him and she said, nailed you. She said, this lady's from the health department and we're getting cited. The chickens out of him. But that's the first thing. The second thing, at another hospital, and I'll never forget, it was the 5th of July, the day after the holiday. I went in early, and it was 6 o'clock in the morning, and a rep comes by, and he had 2 trays, and he said, they were already wrapped and sterilized. And I said, what are these for? He said, we have a case at 10 o'clock. I said, and you're bringing them in now? He said, well, yesterday was a holiday. I said, well, we were open. You
Mm-hmm.
could have brought them yesterday. I said, so you're going to have to wait for us to go through the process. Well, of course, he goes running up to the OR telling the surgeon, your case is going to be delayed because that nasty lady down in SPD won't process your trace for me. And I mean, the surgeon knew me and he called, he said, what's going on, Nancy? And I told him, he said, fine, do what you have to do. I
Yeah.
opened the tray, as God is my witness. A dead bug is inside of the tray. Now, people might say, well, the bug was dead. It's still a bug. It doesn't belong in there. And that's because they put them in the back of their car. They're kept in their garage. You know,
Mm-hmm.
sometimes there's, Kentucky Fried Chicken residues and what have you. You never accept a tray that comes into you sterile, whether it's from another hospital, unless it's a hospital in your system and you have a policy on that,
Uh-huh.
or from another facility that somebody claims is sterile. You have no idea what happened to that tray, how it was handled, how it was stored, the temperature, the humidity, bioburden, none of that.
Uh-huh.
So we did process the entire tray and then got it up to them. We got it there by 11:30, so it wasn't too bad. The case was scheduled for 11. But this is why it's so important that people know what's coming into them and to make sure to stand up for the patient. You know, just
Uh-huh.
because somebody's standing there and stomping their feet doesn't mean it's right.
And not allowing shortcuts and processing it correctly is 100% standing up for the patient.
Absolutely.
I've had some reps that I would call and say, where is this loaner? And he's like, I'm going to get to you as soon as possible. My wife is at home waiting for the delivery truck. Like it gets delivered to their home, then they swing by and pick it up. Like this is my favorite rep story. More has to do with consignment.
Yeah.
I was at a surgery center and I was scrubbing a case and we were doing just a hernia. And this happens a lot. 2 reps got assigned to that case to bring in consignment mesh. And that's happened with even orthopedic. You get 2 reps come in for the same case. There was a mix up with the booking. We're in the middle of the procedure and we have both reps sitting there in their hand with their mesh, like trying to fight us. And the doctor looks at me and says, what mesh do you want to use, Jason? And I looked at the doctor. I said, that rep brought donuts. That one did not. And the rep that brought the donuts, we used his mesh. So,
that is funny.
Yeah. So it's always good to be on time and to bring a little something and treat your SPD and surgical staff really well, because sometimes the little people have a voice.
Unbelievable.
Not all the time. Only in New Jersey.
You're right. You're right.
Amy's pretty much follow manufacturer's instructions with loaners, right? Nothing more to the puzzle.
No, it's just the same. Loaners are not privileged instruments.
Yeah.
They have to follow the same procedures as for anything else. Whatever the IFU says, that's what we have to do.
Is there any Joint Commission survey risks?
I don't know if Joint Commission looks at they're supposed to look at your policies. If they know anything about loaned instruments, they may ask about, do you do IUSS? Do you have any problems with, them coming in on time? But most of the people that contact me for Joint Commission citations, it doesn't involve loaned instruments. It's other things that we could talk about on another program, but not loaned instruments.
Well, you know what? No, it just hit my memory. We did a facility many years ago, impacted loaners massively. Joint Commission cited them for stacking. All their loaners were stacked. And at the time, it wasn't in the manufacturers of the wrap. We had to go as consultants. Well, I went. And that OR was shut down for 3 days, redoing their whole entire system and re-sterilizing everything.
Yeah, that falls under ST79 and manufacturer's instructions because, and unfortunately, a lot of stuff has changed. For example,
yes,
one of the major issues with loaned instruments is torn wrappers.
Mm-hmm.
And then the operating room gets it and it's no good. We'll have a problem with that. Number one, you should be checking your items each step of the process. If you take it off the autoclave cart and you see that it has a torn wrapper, reprocess it. No, they just send it up to the operating room and then they find it.
Yeah.
So what happened is that people started putting it inside of rigid containers, figuring, now I don't have to worry anymore. Well, guess what? The loaned instrument manufacturers didn't know that SPD was doing this. And I learned because I went to a facility and they had all of their implant trays in containers. And I said, who gave you the okay to do that? Oh, the sales rep. Really? Okay. So when I went back home, I called the company and I knew the rep because he served on our loaned instrument committee at Amy. And I shared with him, he said, are you kidding me? I said, no, I'm not. That sales rep was fired.
Wow.
Because he didn't want to lose that, business there. And I understand that, but it doesn't mean that you allow people to do something wrong that's going to be wrong for the patient. However, bringing that to the attention of the committee, which happened at the next meeting, the loaned instrument companies were very, very concerned. They said, you have no right to do this with our instruments without our knowledge. So that resulted in a whole changeover where now you can place your loaned instruments in a rigid container, but only if the loaned instrument manufacturer has it in their IFU, and you have to comply with the requirements for the loan for the container. Well, of course, every instrument container manufacturer was there, and all the major ones do comply. But that was a major issue. Now, the other thing is people don't read the information. Say it's XYZ loaned instrument, they think automatically all of them can be put in a container. No, you have to verify with the company. And if you're not sure, you call them and say, can this tray be put in a container? And they may say, no, you cannot. Or they might put it in the IFU. This excludes ABC instruments. So don't assume that if a company says you could put this particular total knee or total hip in a container, that you can do all of the other sets from their inventory. So that became a major, major issue, was putting the instruments in the rigid containers. The second thing is, initially we were told that you could stack them up to too high. I don't know where that came from. Then the rigid containers, we were always told you could stack them as high as you want. Now, this is in storage, not in the sterilizer, okay? Because they're in a container and it's not going to damage the instruments. Now, it just became too much because as they tested them, who was saying this, who was saying that. So now it says you can only stack them if it's in the IFU for the packaging we're using. So whether it's wrapped, whether it's a container, or even a peel pack. Do you ever see peel packs that are in a basket and they're all stacked on top of each other instead of on their side?
Yeah.
Well, when you think about them on top of each other, you're putting so much weight on top of them. How do you know that you're not causing damage to the packaging on the bottom? As a matter of fact, I wish I had used some of my slides for this. We had a problem with holes in wrappers in our orthopedic trays. So we put through a quality assurance process where every tray, when it was taken off the sterilizer, was inspected. We had a form. They had to document the tray, who inspected it. There were no defects. It was put on a closed cart, metal cart, and brought to the operating room. And for 2 weeks, it worked perfectly. Then all of a sudden, we start getting complaints again. I said, something is wrong. So I go up to the operating room, and I'm going around, and I see this room is getting ready for a case. And I see, I think there were 11 of our wrap trays stacked on top of one another on a ring stand. And I called the OR director over and I said, this is why we were putting them on the cart. You were not supposed to take them off the cart and stack them again once you had them. When you consider that each tray, and at that time we didn't have the 25-pound weight limit, each tray is 25 pounds. We figured there was almost 250 pounds of weight on that bottom tray. There's no wrapper out there that I know that can withstand that kind of pressure without breaking and getting that, typical cut that you see on the weekend. So this is the weakest part of the instruments, the tray. So this is why it's so important that, you follow the manufacturer's instructions. And because of of the issues with the information changing so frequently, there is no standard now. You go by the instructions of the packaging manufacturer.
As somebody that has pretty much equal experience in the operating room as in sterile processing,
Mhm.
and this is my opinion, but the holes come from the operating room. I'm telling you, the sub-sterile rooms where they pick a lot of, some SPDs pick cases, but a lot of operating rooms are now reverting to having a lot of their instruments back into the operating room and in their sub-sterile areas. And when they're in that environment, yes, that is the operating room, because I'll walk through and see things, people slamming, people leaning on them,
Yeah.
people moving them like this, looking for stuff. Yeah.
Sterile is not considered a sterile storage area. You don't have temperature and humidity control there because that's where your flash sterilizers are located.
No, I mean like the center core, not
Center
not the
core.
sub, the
Okay.
center core. Yeah. And I worked in a lot of facilities in the last 10 years where OR director was pulling instruments out of SPD and bringing them back to the OR. I think maybe giving SPD back the stuff they rarely used, which
Yeah.
I think that's if you're really if it's your hot items, it should be down there for you guys for them to grab in their department, especially if it's an emergency and they drop something, they don't got time for it to travel from sterile processing. So I don't disagree with it, but that definitely, I always have love that conversation. What other, dedicated loaners. Coordinator. That's your big hospital position. What is your opinion about having a designated loaner coordinator?
Well, again, horror story.
Mhm.
I go to one of my facilities that was having some issues. I get there at 6 o'clock in the morning, and the nursing director, not the OR director, the nursing supervisor, I should say, for the OR. She comes over. She said, "Nancy, we have a problem. They're ready. They're going to do a total knee at 8 o'clock, and we can't find the instruments." It was Dr. So-and-so. I said, "Okay, let me check." Now, this hospital was the first in our system to have a tracking system. I didn't know much about it, but I went to the staff. I first checked decontaminant. There was nothing there. Everything had been processed. I go into prep, it wasn't there. We checked the sterilization records, it wasn't there. We verified everything in the tracking system, not there. I even called the evening staff at home and asked them if they had seen any instruments, and they said no. So I went back and I said, "They're not here." Answer I gave was impossible. They probably were labeled wrong. So, we didn't know what else to do. So now I have people that are opening instruments. We don't even know what the heck we're opening, but we're opening anything that we think could be mislabeled. And I said, "This is crazy." So I called the sales rep and I said, "What's going on?" I said, "They're looking for these instruments." I said, "And they're not here." "Yes, they are." I said, "Well, then you can come in and find them because we can't." So he came in, can't find the instruments. So I said, "Okay, we're going to start from the beginning. Who ordered them?" "The surgeon." Okay. Surgeon ordered them on Friday. Sales rep had them sent in by FedEx. When FedEx comes to that facility, they go to the loading dock. Loading dock is closed on weekends. So where did they go? I go into the department. They said, "Oh, when anything comes in on a weekend, it goes to security."
Yep.
We go down to security. There's the trays. They didn't know what the heck to do with them.
Yep.
Now, this was a total collapse of communication. So that was another thing we put in our loaner policy. If the operating room, surgeon, or even the rep has any knowledge of instruments that were coming in, they were required to inform SPD what was coming in, when it was coming in, and how it was coming in.
Mhm.
Because if they had known that they were coming in on Saturday, they would have known to go to security and get them, and they would have been processed. I mean, this went all the way up to the CEO. I was in the CEO's office for a good hour and a half, And I explained the whole situation. He said, "This is stupid." I said, I didn't want to agree with him, but yeah, it is. I said, but it's a communication issue. I said, so we've got to have better communication. I said, people, I use the example, we're not Karnak. We don't know what's happening just by, putting a piece of paper to our head.
Yeah.
So communication is critical. If they could have somebody like that. But again, Jason, what's the backup? What happens when that person goes on vacation or calls out sick?
Yep. Yeah, it may work in some facilities, but and you don't know. Some people say, well, they have the supervisor. Supervisor's not there 7 days a week. There's not always a supervisor on every shift. I think you have to have a good documentation, good communication, and you need to share that with all your staff.
And sometimes materials orders it. They'll have a list that the surgeon gave to the nurse, and they'll give it to materials. But regardless of who's placing the order, if you want them processed in the time frame that they are required, then you have to notify SPD.
Yeah, I tell you real briefly. Going back 2018, I worked at a facility for a short period of time. We did off-site reprocessing, and we had, I think, 5 hospitals and 2 surgical centers giving us, and it was all the same system.
Oh, okay.
And all same system. So that was very easy in a sense. But I had Monday through Friday, 7 to 3 and 3 to 11, a person in decontam area pushed way back, because this is like a factory. So they're nowhere near the instruments, by the door with a desk. Every loaner, this was their whole job, 2 people, their whole job, one for days and one for evenings. All day long, the only thing they did was bring in loaners, take pictures, take inventory, and sign them in and sign them out. That's all they did. But it was so much, all those hospitals, it was so much that was 2 full FTEs were utilized for that. Monday through Friday, it was insane. I never saw it again, never did it again, because I've never been in that situation. But something like that, I can understand where you have that at that volume.
Yeah.
But your regular hospitals now, everybody needs to know what's going on.
SPD has got to be included in the communications. There's just no way. We're like sitting ducks. Sometimes I joke and say, I think they created SPD so they had somebody to, blame everything on. But, that's not true anymore. I think we have much better relationships with the operating room and even some of the surgeons. I know we had one surgeon at one of my hospitals that really thought that SPD was evil. And I was on the OR committee from corporate to try and smooth things out. And I said, I know you're very busy. All I ask is 5 minutes of your time. If you could just give me 5 minutes and come to SPD, I want to show you something. And he said, okay, I'll be there Thursday morning. And sure enough, he came Thursday morning at the time designated. And I just brought him into decontam. We didn't even have to go any further. And I was showing him what the process was. And he said, I can't believe this. He said, this is what you people have to do for these hundreds of trays to come through? I said, yes, and this is just the tip of the iceberg. I said, after this, we have to inspect them and wrap them and then sterilize them. He said, I will never bother your department again, because now I understand why it takes so long to process a tray. That's where we fall short. We don't take the time to get that information out.
So like, I'm going to go back just 2 years ago. See, my opinion is a little different in the sense that I think we've gotten such progress with surgeons, and I think and operating room managers, surgical techs and circulator nurses. It's gone backwards. For prime example, the way I was 2 years ago, SPD was the problem for everything in the operating room, right? And that was coming from the people in the room. Now, the OR director certainly didn't believe that. And the surgeons didn't know what to hear, because all they hear while they're doing surgery is SPD, SPD. So the doctors started not wanting to listen to the staff in the room with them and said, what's really going on? And they were taking tours, like you said, and looking at us, and they were going, oh my God, Like, I can't believe this. So unfortunately, I think the doctors are catching on, and I think management's catching on, but the staff in the rooms in a lot of places still don't, because they don't want to take a hit, during the case. So there's still that blame. But again, with SPD, I think the managers are pretty good in the sense that when it's their staff versus the OR, but SPD staff a lot of times still don't want to take the fall for it and still push it. Well, it's the OR. It's the OR. The staff on staff issue is still massive when it comes to that.
I think, unfortunately, there's still some people, and I've seen this many times in both departments, that are, let's just say, less than happy with their job.
Yeah.
And they're pot stirrers, no matter what you do. And in that case, I would just report it to the operating room, say, we had an incident. So, and she would do the same, if it involved one of the SPD people. But I think in terms of the best thing you can do when the OR has a problem, make yourself accessible. Go to that room. Again, you got to have scrubs on to do that. We talked about that before.
Yeah.
Put your scrubs on. Don't send one of your technicians. Show management is responsible. Okay. Go up. What's the problem? I'm very sorry. I'm going to make sure this doesn't happen again. That's all they want to hear.
Yeah.
That's all they want to hear. And I learned this very early on in my SPD career when I got a call from a doctor on the floor, and he said, "Are you the manager?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "I want you to know I have 3 suction machines that came from your department and none of them work. And this is deplorable." And I said, "Where are you?" And he told me. I went up to the floor and I apologized to him. And I said, "I will get to the bottom of this." I said, "I took this machine, I tested it, I'm bringing it up to you." I said, "And it should work." He looked at me and he said, "I've never had anybody come up and actually want to resolve a problem for me and apologize." He said, "And I thank you for that." And what we found was there actually was a gauge that we could use to check the pressure on the Wagensteins to make sure that they were working appropriately. And Biomed bought it for us, and we put it on a log sheet and documented it. Never had a problem again.
Yeah.
So you have to show that you want to resolve the issues. You're a team player. They understand that nobody's perfect. We strive to be, but things do happen. But you've got to be more active. You've got to be more proactive.
Yeah, it's a really good point, because like I've had this happen to me where I've had really good rapport with my staff. And sometimes my staff would say, like the OR would be beating on me and they would feel bad. And then little things would happen in the operating room, and my tech would go, like, in their own mind, go, "Well, he's having a bad day. I'll just go in there for him." And they go in and try to solve the problem. But then nobody tells you that happened. And then later, it's brought up and you're like, "That happened? Like, and the technician was just doing being a nice, caring, thoughtful person. But if you are going to help out when you're not assigned, you got to really make sure your boss knows and everybody knows what happened, because it's an honorable thing to do. But it's like you said, ultimately, it is the responsibility of management to get in there. Just like when you're shopping at Walmart, Target, and you're not going to want to argue with the staff person. You want the manager, because that's where you're going to get your answers from. It's not their job. It's not your job to beat them down.
Exactly.
Just like me, I was a firm believer, like when the operating room would come into my department and start reprimanding my staff. No, that's my job. Like, you tell me and I will decide if they need to know this or not. Like, you just don't walk right in and start complaining to them that they did things wrong.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right there. And vice versa. To summarize, it has to start with a policy.
Yep.
And all your expectations have to be in that policy. Then you have to enforce it. What happens when it doesn't get enforced? At our system, if we had loan reps who were not complying with the policy, materials first called the rep and told them they were on thin ice. If it happened again, they called their manager. And if it happened again, they called the company. So, they knew, and they were told they had to sign that they received a copy of our loaned instrument policy.
Mm-hmm.
They couldn't say they didn't know what the expectations were, even though they were told to them.
Yeah.
That is the most critical thing in loaned instruments. The second thing is the in-servicing. Whatever you have to do to get it done. Everybody has a cell phone today. You can make a video of the in-service, and now you have it for your staff.
Mm-hmm.
And the third thing is communication. You've got to have communication. We talked about an end of shift report. When the second shift comes in, say, look, we just got 40 loan trays in. I'm sorry they came in at 3:30. We're starting them, but you're going to have to make sure to finish them because the cases is 7:30.
Mm-hmm.
We've got to get that communication because our job is to make sure that those instruments are clean, sterile, and cool in time for that surgical procedure and in good condition. When I mean that, means there's no torn wrappers or anything else.
Yeah.
And then communications with the staff as well as with the surgeons to make sure that everybody's on the same page and they know that we're an integral part of the surgical team, which we are. The surgical team cannot function without SPD.
No.
As good as our surgeons are, they can't do the surgery without the instruments, and only we can provide it to them. And that's why, this whole process is so critical.
Everybody's important. I mean, it takes the operating room, sterile processing, surgeon, and the patient. Without that, there's nothing. But all three are going to have egos at one point. The one person that doesn't is the patient, and that's what we're all there for. We have to put everything aside and what is best for the patient. How do we give them the best experience?
Yeah, I just want to end with this one thing. It's kind of funny, but it isn't. As you know, I've had a number of joints replaced, and each time I knew the rep and I knew the surgeons and everybody. And when I was brought into the operating room, I said, "Don't put me to sleep yet." I look over and said, "All the chemical indicators okay? You got all the trays you needed? No IUSS, not allowed." And all of a sudden, the surgeon will say, "Put her to sleep." The point is, patients don't have that luxury. Okay. They're assuming when they come in that everything's going to be perfect, as it should be.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But we have to consider every single time, every patient, regardless of their background, their ability to pay or what have you, has the right to safe and sterile products when they're being used. That is our contract with them.
Yeah, I can only imagine if you had a spinal.
Oh, well, that happened twice. The first two surgeries, when they went with the towel clip and it got up to my knee, and I said, "Ouch!" And he said, "Oh dear Lord." So they had to give me a spinal a second time, and that worked. When they did the other hip, the same thing happened. He said, "No more spinals for you."
Spinals. Yeah. I can imagine you awake during surgery. Oh God.
Oh, I didn't. I yelled at him because he was talking about the new video system we put in. I said, "Will you please concentrate on my knee? I don't care about the video system." And that's when he told the anesthesiologist to give me something else to shut me up. But I knew I could do that with him.
Oh, God. All right. Well, I want to thank our listeners. Please like, subscribe our channels. I'll leave any comments, especially if you want a topic. Please let us know in the comments.
Thank you. I hope you all enjoyed this.
To receive your free CEU approved by the CBSSPD and HSPA, go to www.spdceus.com. Watch the entire podcast on the Sterile Processing University page, and then after that, you will receive a free 1-hour CEU. Thank you.